Hey guys, welcome to the PLOspectives episode 2, a show where we explore unbeatable strategies within the great game of Pot Limit Omaha. We take one hand, go through the action, and see how each party should have played their hand and how they should construct their ranges. And here is a disclaimer. Don't take my words for granted. Every situation in PLO is different, so do your own research. Results and conclusions made and shown in this video are only true under these specific assumptions, uh, stack sizes, reads on opponents, and rake structure. So without further ado, let's jump into the action. In today's episode, we're gonna look at a hand that I played recently at PLO 200 table. So it gets folded around to Cutoff, who has double suited King King 10 6. Obviously, is an easy open. With a raise, and we get a 3-bet by the button. Both blinds fold, and the action is back on us. And if we take a look at preflop sim for 200 zoom rake structure, our hand is a pure call, no 4-betting with this hand. And in fact, if you look at all double suited kings, there's no folding. We call 72% and we 4-bet 27%. The ones that we 4-bet either have an ace that blocks buttons ace combinations, or has slightly better connectivity, like 8-9, what's it, like 10-7 low frequency, or has double paired. Yeah, 8-9, 8-7, 9-7. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We end up calling, and we see a flop of 3-6-5. Now, in order to understand bet sizings on this board, on this board texture, I ran a couple of different simulations with different bet sizings. So the first simulation I ran, I gave out of position the option to stab half pot, and in position stab 33%. In another sim, and by the way, when in position stabs, out of position had an option to call or raise half pot. In another sim, out of position still had one option to bet half pot. In position now has the option to bet also half pot, and once in position stabs or c-bets, out of position had the option to check raise half pot or check raise pot. And interesting thing that if we compare frequencies, c-betting frequencies for in position for 33% and for half pot, you can see that c-bet frequency for 33% is 38% and for half pot 39%, so pretty identical. So it doesn't make sense in this spot to bet larger, because we want to have better price with our bluffs, and also we kind of force our opponents to continue wider while ourselves playing in position, having that positional advantage, which will allow us to make better decisions on later streets. So now we know that in position should be betting c-betting 33%. What about check raising for out of position? So in the second sim, out of position had two options to check raise half pot and pot size, and as you can see, half pot option wasn't even used. Almost only 1% of half pot raisins and 14% of pot raising. If we take a look at this sim, it was 15% check raises for pot size. So overall, doesn't make sense to check raise for half pot, which again kind of makes sense because we don't really have check raise folds here. So every hand that we check raise, we're gonna stack off. So now we know proper bet sizes for this flop and board texture. So let's see how we should have played our hand. King king 10-6. King king 10-6 should be a lead. So we had, what did we have? So we have king high flush draw and no backdoor flush draw. Oops, wrong sim. So we should be stabbing this hand. As you can see, this hand is right here. We should be leading. Oh no, sorry. That is correct. No, wait. Out of position. King king 10-6. Solver splits it into checking 60% and leading 32%. Balances out this way. So once we lead and face a raise, we're gonna fold. This is something interesting because within 100 big blinds, we would be stacking off with this hand, but we're slightly deeper here, like 115 or something, and that changes things quite a bit. So we should be folding our kings after lead here, and I'm gonna show you why also just in a minute. So had we checked our kings and faced a stab, we would call, also would be calling versus half pot size bet. I checked that. Go back to another sim, not this one. So we lead, get raised, and we fold. So now I want to explain why we will be folding a hand as strong as this one. Is because if you take a look at in position potting range, which is 13%, and we filter out his nut flush draws, so hand that doesn't have nut flush draw, the frequency will drop down to only 6.3%, which is over 55% of his entire raising range. So that means once we lead our kings and face a raise, our opponent will have nut flush draw over 55% of times. We'll have at least a nut flush draw with or without an overpair. That doesn't make a big difference. And if we take a look at our equity of our specific hand versus any flush draw, any type of nut flush draw, we're only gonna have 33% of equity. But if you take a look at the stack to pot ratio, which is currently 4.1, you're gonna see that we need 44% of equity to be stacking off and being break even. So that's why we're gonna be lead folding our hand, because every second hand or every other hand, and even slightly more frequently, we're gonna be drawing to only 33% in general. So in the actual hand, I decided to check, face the c-bet from my opponent, and I decided to check raise, which is also not solver approved, but I didn't find another option during the game. My opponent decided to jam, and obviously I was committing myself with this flop check raise, so I decided to stack off. And our opponent showed ace 10-7 rainbow, and we end up winning a hand. But on the flop, I'm gonna show you his hand had only 47% equity. And let's see if he played his hand correctly or he could take any other line. So we start from pre-flop. So it's button versus cutoff raise, ace, ace, 10, 7. As you can see, I don't even have to filter out rainbow aces. Those are a 3-bet within 100 big blind stack sizes. So pre-flop is fine. All right, I get it. I'm also gonna define, like, I'm gonna choose villain as a hero, and I'm gonna use range for cutoff, and I'm gonna define cutoff's range. So for cutoff, like, GTO would be to give like first in 30%, which is may or may not be true. Yeah, depends, but we try to base our estimations on GTO, so I'm gonna assign for cutoff 30% raise first in, and I'm gonna exclude 4% 4-bet in range. So because cutoff did not 4-bet versus button, I'm gonna exclude his top 4%. And on the flop, once we c-bet, let's actually check if that's even a c-bet. Back to in position, who has ace, ace, 10, 7 rainbow. As you can see, this hand should be a check. This hand has a showdown value, does not have great blockers or additional equity, but benefits a lot from taking one street closer to showdown. So yeah, it's very vulnerable versus races. So, but once bet, I think it should be folding to check raise, because if we take a look once again, stacked about ratio is 4.1. Poker just calculates stack of equity required for us. So hero needs 38.55% equity, and that's versus range. No, that's what he needs overall. But if we define range for cutoff, we can calculate whether this stack up will be profitable or not. So for cutoff, I assigned a range of any pair with at least a flush draw. So any pair or with sidecards with at least a flush draw. Any 2-pair with at least a gut shot, or any 3 pairs or better, which is, from my experience, is the widest but at the same time the most fair range that cutoff will be check raising here with. So we're gonna run a shoving module under these assumptions, and then we're gonna slightly adjust it. So I'm gonna give the same range for his stack off, because cutoff doesn't really have check raise folds in his range. So we assume once he check raise, he's committed, and we don't have any fold equity. He's gonna stack up with his entire range. And we're gonna run a shoving module. So we have 38% versus his check raising range, and the overall EV of a shove would be minus 4.2 euros, which is 2.25 big blinds. And that's versus this specific range, which I think is not that close as population actually plays. I think population range would be slightly tighter, so I exclude any pair with flush draw, and I'm gonna say any 2-pair with at least a flush draw or a gut shot, or 3 pairs or better. I mean, like, 3 pairs and sets don't need any backup to be stacking off here for obvious reasons. So, and the weakest holding would be 2-pair with any type of like flush draw or gutter. That this range is more closer to how population actually plays. So we're gonna run same modules would now, oh, wait a moment, I should give this range over here as well. And right now we can see our equity dropped from 38% to only 11, while we need at least 38.5 to be break even. And this jam becomes just terrible. From being like -2 big blinds, it becomes now -65 big blinds. This is just huge overplay from my opponent, and he should be either checking on the flop, or I get the c-bet, like, yeah, 7 of diamonds blocks some of the flush draws, blocks some of the straight draws, but that's about it. Once he faces raise, like, he doesn't have enough equity to continue, and this is just showing you why. And especially this range, which is, like, as I said, the way most people play. This is just stacking up for like -60 plus BB per 100 expectancy. Not a great idea. So just wanted to show you to be careful, because this is something that I see people do a lot. Like, they just think any pair of aces is good in any 3-bet pot on any board texture with any stack sizes, and they just commit um, with no backup. Alright guys, that's it for this episode. Stay unbeatable. I'm your pillable Flares. See you at the tables. Take care.